Namaste. I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in beautiful San Diego. Thank you so much for subscribing to this channel. Please make sure that you like the video you've just watched and consider making a contribution on our app or on our website. It's really easy to do, and thank you in advance for that support. It does make a difference. So we've been exploring together this book by Eric Butterworth. The title of it is The Creative Life, 7 Keys to Your Inner Genius. How many of you recognize the name Eric Butterworth, right? Much loved Unity minister, no longer in physical form on our planet, but his reach was far and wide and deep. He was often referred to as the Emerson of the New Thought movement. And in his book, The Creative Life, what he has done is he's taken a mystical and metaphysical look at the 7 days of creation in the allegorical story in Genesis. And so each day he's taken a look at what does that day represent mystically and metaphysically in terms of our own creative process. He writes the creation story is not something God does or did. It is what God is. Creativity is a God process in you expressing as you. Creativity is a God process in me expressing as me. Creativity is a God process in you expressing as you. We're looking today at the 4th day of creation, but I want to do a real quick short review because there's a sequence to this. Remember, this story is not a historical, literal story. It's an allegory. It is a metaphysical story that we can look at. We can look at it metaphysically, rather, and see a process for ourselves in our own creativity. So on day 1, we read, "Let there be light. Let there be light. Divine illumination. Let there be light. Let there be divine illumination. Let the light bulb go off," right? And that we best do that really in a state of prayer or a state of meditation when the mind is a little more at rest, a little clearer. Day 2, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and God called the firmament heaven. Heaven comes from a Greek word, oranos, that carries with it the connotation of expansion, expanding, and it is the idea that faith is what moves us into this expanded state. And we think about our process, our personal process of creativity. There's the light bulb that goes off. There's that divine illumination. But to move beyond that, we have to move into a space with faith, right? It is faith that will get us up off our meditation mat and move toward that idea. In day 3, let the waters be gathered together unto one place and let the dry land appear. And I get such a vivid picture of that. Let the waters be gathered unto one place and let the dry land appear. The idea beginning to take some form, some shape, some detail, right? And we begin to get more than just the flash of insight and more than just the faith to move us forward, but now we're starting to get a bit of a picture of it. And Eric reminded us that it's not just seeing the image, but if you were with us last week or you tuned in last week, you know it was seeing from the image, which is subtly but powerfully different. And that brings us to today, the 4th day of creation. Let there be lights in the heavens to divide the day from the night. The greater light to rule the day, the sun, the lesser light to rule the night, the moon. Now, Eric's metaphysical interpretation of the sun is that the sun symbolizes understanding. And his metaphysical interpretation of the moon is that the moon symbolizes the will. And so that's what we're going to be looking at now with the idea of our own personal creative process, the idea of understanding, the idea of will, and how does that come into play? You may be wanting to create a very significant change in your life. to bring about something that doesn't exist for you right now. And so what is the interplay and what is the importance of understanding and will? Symbolically, the lights of the sun and the moon represent awakening. Think about that for a moment. Awakening. Awakening of understanding. Awakening of will. But it's a particular kind of understanding. And it's a particular kind of will, a particular kind of understanding, a particular kind of will, an understanding of ourselves, an understanding of our true nature, and an understanding of will that is not a willfulness, but a willingness. And there is a big difference between a willfulness and a willingness. So what does this understanding of ourselves, how does that come into play with creativity? The importance of understanding what we're made of to the personal creative process itself. There is a connection when we really understand who and what we are. When we get that we are more than this physical form. When we get that we are more than the biggest mistake we've ever made or even the biggest positive thing we've ever done, when we get that we are more than all of that, we begin to move ourselves into what I would call a place of joyful optimism and joyful confidence. And it's not the egotistical kind. It's coming from deep within us, from our God sense, our God self. There are some inspiring words from David in Psalm 8. Man is crowned with glory and honor and endowed with dominion over all things. Glory and honor. Glory and honor. When you think of that, doesn't that sound good? That sounds really good to me, that we are crowned with glory and honor. I remember taking trips with our kids when they were younger. We would do an international trip a year. And we toured so many castles all throughout Europe. And one of our son's favorite things to do was to go into the special parts of the castles and the museums where all of the crowns were for the kings. You know, and we would always try to bring home a souvenir. The ones he wanted, we couldn't bring home, right? But I get this idea from David, crowned with glory and honor. And of course, David's not talking about a physical piece of metal on our heads. He's talking about this idea that we are so much more, each and every one of us, so much more than what we usually think of ourselves. That yes, we are human and we are divine. We are human and we are divine. And the divine in us always transcends the human. Always transcends the human. We are bigger. We are bigger than our littleness. And we are stronger than our weakness. Do you believe that about yourself? Do you ever find it easier to believe that more about somebody else? Yeah, sometimes I find that easier to do. In fact, I usually find that easier to do. And part of our work is to also take that onto ourselves. And not in a place of ego. It's really, I think, in a place of honoring the God essence that is at the very core of what each and every one of us is. That we really are crowned with glory and honor and endowed with dominion over all things. I was having a very important conversation I think it was Friday, with a ministerial friend and colleague of mine. Her name is, I'll just give her first name. Her name is Deborah. And she is working through some situations in her life, like all of us, right? And as she was talking, she said something to me that really struck me. And it was an idea that had crossed her mind that struck her and was helpful to her in meeting the situation that she's needing to meet in her life. And it was this. She said, Wendy, as ministers, we have said and we have been taught we are spiritual beings having a human experience. I said, yeah, I know. We're spiritual beings, having a human experience. And she said, but you know what I got the other day? I got that's not quite right. We are spiritual beings having a spiritual experience in a human body. We are spiritual beings having a spiritual experience in our human body, in our human form. We need this human form, this vehicle, to move through this plane of existence. She says we are spiritual beings having a spiritual experience in this physical body. Imagine what that means then when we meet, say, a health challenge or a financial challenge or any sort of difficulty. We get an understanding that whatever is happening, to use words that Eric would use, not at our expense, but at our expanse. Not at our expense, but at our expanse. That there is an expanding, if you will, a growing in wisdom, a growing in capacity, a growing in insight at the soul level. We are spiritual beings having a spiritual experience in a human form. Can you see where that plays into our creative process? When we get that, I think we get bolder in what we will go for. We are filled more with a sense of joyful optimism and joyful confidence, because we get that we are more than what we have thought ourselves to be in the past. And so we have the sun, which is, mystically, Eric says, this idea of awakening to the understanding of who and what we are. And the lesser light, the moon, which is a reflection of the sun, he says, is the idea of will. Because we can't just have the insight and the faith to move forward and the image of what we're moving toward and the understanding of who and what we are. We need the energy to move forward, right? A certain kind of determination to move forward. But the kind of will or the kind of determination that works best in the creative process is not the gritted teeth. It's not the forcefulness. I think of the artists that I know in my life, and I cannot imagine them holding a paintbrush with tight hands trying to paint something, or an artist sketching. There's got to be what? A fluidity, right? And so the will, the particular kind of will that's needed, is a willingness. Eric says, not the will of gritted teeth, but the energy of participation with the creative flow. The energy of participation with the creative flow. The willingness that gives way to the spiritual process. It's not the will of gritted teeth, but the energy of complete participation within the creative flow. He goes on to say the whole, that we need to understand this key point, the whole of infinite mind is present in its entirety in every experience of your life and in every idea of your mind. This means an idea or an image comes replete with the understanding of how to complete it and the will to persevere in the process. If you remain open, the understanding will come, the knowledge by which your imaginings can be achieved. And with the understanding will come the light of the moon, the will, or the motivation to go forward. The most important thing to realize here is that the will is a reflection of understanding, just as the moon is a reflection of the sun. And so in all of this, in day 1, in day 2, in day 3, and day 4, where we are now, and where we will go, there is an important word, an all-important word. And that word is the word let. Let there be. Say that with me. Let there be. When you say that, can you get a sense of what that feels like? The idea of let. It's not a giving up, but it's not a forcefulness either. It's a cooperation. It's a cooperation with something that transcends and includes our own effort. Let there be. Not there will be. Not, dear Lord, I hope there is. But let there be. The energy of let there be, he says, gives direction to the creative flow. It doesn't try to force or control it. Let gives direction. Can you get a sense of that? I hope you can. Sometimes words can be so limiting if we only take them in cognitively. I think we really need to take them into our bodies and get a sense of what the energy is behind the word. To let there be is to cooperate. It is to move along with. And there's no question that sometimes this can be really tough to do. When we're in the midst of the creative process, when we're wanting to bring forth something new in our life, some greater good, something different that is a dream for us, a hope for us, and something comes in to interrupt that process, some event happens in our lives that throws us off base, something tough happens, it can be hard to stay in this mindset. And yet that's where the practice is. And when bad stuff happens, rather than staying in the energy of why me, we need to use those moments and recenter ourselves and move away from the why me question and recenter ourselves and respond from the deeper sense of who and what we are. We must take responsibility for the co-creative process in those times. And we need to ask ourselves, what has been my mindset that has contributed to bringing me to the place that I am, the place where I don't want to be? Eric writes about this idea of mental trends, that too often when something negative happens in our lives, that we can fall into this why me, questioning this why me energy, and almost as if we have this attitude like, well, it just happened out of the blue. And I was inspired and intrigued by some words he said about this, or not said, but wrote about this, that we really need to look at our mental trends, the overarching flow and direction of where we have been sending our mental energy. He says, you do not jump from good fortune to misfortune. And even though things sometimes occur as if suddenly, and you say, I don't know what happened, things generally don't just happen. Things generally don't just happen. Often they've been happening for a long time. There were trends involved. If we're honest with ourselves, that's true. Most of the things that happen in our lives, the good and the what we might label the not so good, don't usually just happen. They've been happening how? Over time, by the consistency, the repetition of our thinking, our feeling, our deciding, our choosing, our acting, thought by thought, built upon over time. And so as we think about our own life, and as we circle back to this idea of the creative process, we want to look at how do we bring forth these ideas taken mystically from this beautiful creation story, to be inspired, to receive that divine illumination, to have a sense of faith, to move toward that, whatever that may be. And as we begin to move toward that, to realize that movement forward will begin to coalesce in that idea becoming more visible to us, more concrete in our mind's eye, more clear as a picture. And that we don't just see it, but we see from it. And then we put our whole selves into the process in realizing that we are crowned with glory and majesty and potential. And we bring that forward in a way that is willing in a way that is cooperative. So I hope that as you continue to work with these ideas, that you play with them and you allow yourself to be more spontaneous and more creative in your own process of growing and developing. Namaste.